Hi, I'm Kate, and this is the version of Cinderella which I recently told my class. Cinderella. Once upon a time there was a city where a man lived with his beloved wife and daughter. One day the wife fell seriously ill and called her daughter to her bedside. "Daughter," she said, "I want you to live your life with patience and kindness, for only in that way will you find true happiness." Not long after, the wife died, and the daughter visited her grave every day and watered its flowers with her own tears. Soon winter came, but before the snow had melted on the grave, her father had remarried. This new wife brought with her 2 daughters. These daughters had beautiful faces, but their hearts were cold and cruel. They took away the daughter's fine clothes and forced her to stay locked up in the kitchen, doing the work of the cooking and the cleaning all day. They even forced her to sleep on the kitchen floor by the cinders in the fire. And for that reason, they called her Cinderella. Her father was so full of grief for his lost wife and so full of hope for his new one that he barely even noticed what had happened to his beloved daughter. Now, one day, the father decided to go to town and asked his daughters what they wanted him to bring them. The first daughter said, "I want a brand new dress." The second daughter said, "Fine jewels." And Cinderella said, "Father, just bring me the first twig that knocks against your hat on the way home." So the father went to town and he found the dress and the jewels, and on the way home a hazel twig knocked against his hat. He brought it back and gave it to Cinderella. She was thrilled. She took it to her mother's grave where she planted it immediately. She returned to that spot every day, 3 times a day, and watered the twig with her tears, until before long it blossomed into a beautiful big hazel tree. One day a beautiful white bird appeared in the tree, and Cinderella felt so happy. Finally she had a friend at last, someone to whom she could tell all of her troubles. The next day the king announced that it was time for his son, the prince, to marry, and that there would be 3 nights of royal dances to which all the ladies in the kingdom were invited, and the prince would choose his bride from one of them. Well, as you can imagine, the stepsisters had never been so excited, and they ordered Cinderella to help them get ready. She was forced to comb their hair, lace their dresses, shine their shoes, and bring them their shawls. Once the sisters had departed for the ball, Cinderella approached her stepmother and asked, "Stepmother, please can I go to the ball too?" "Certainly," replied her stepmother. "I just have one job for you to do first." And she took a pot of lentils and emptied them into the ashes on the fire. "Just pick up all of those lentils in 2 hours, and of course you may go." Cinderella went out into the garden and threw her hands up into the sky and sang, "Birds of the sky, give me a chance, help me now so I can dance." Before she knew it, a huge flock of birds flew in and picked up all of those lentils from the ashes in the fire and popped them in a dish for Cinderella. Cinderella went back to her stepmother with the dish and said, "Now can I go, stepmother?" "Why, of course. Just have one more job for you to do first." And this time she took 2 pots of lentils and emptied them both onto the ashes of the fire and said, "Just pick up all of those lentils in 1 hour, and of course you may go." So Cinderella walked back out into the garden once again and threw her arms up to the sky and sang, "Birds of the sky, give me a chance, help me now so I can dance." And again a huge flock of birds flew in and picked up all of those lentils for Cinderella and popped them in a dish. She presented her stepmother with the dish a second time and said, "Now let me go." And the stepmother said, "No, you have nothing but rags to wear," and turned her back on Cinderella and marched off to the ball. Cinderella ran out to her mother's grave, weeping. Before she knew it, there was the bird, the white bird from the hazel tree, and there beside her suddenly lay the most beautiful gold and silver gown, beside a pair of satin slippers. Cinderella quickly put on the dress and put on the shoes and rushed off to the ball. As soon as she arrived, the prince could not help but notice her and was enchanted by her beauty. The stepmother and stepsisters didn't even recognise her at all. The prince and Cinderella danced all night, and then when the clock struck midnight, Cinderella realised it was time for her to go home. The prince asked if he could walk her home, since he was curious to find out where she lived. She agreed, but as soon as they reached the garden gate, Cinderella panicked. "What if the prince sees me in my rags? What then?" So she ran, leaving the prince, into her father's pigeon house. She ran up the stairs and jumped out the window, ran to her mother's grave, took off the dress and replaced it with her rags, and ran back to the kitchen and fell asleep by the fire. Meanwhile, the prince was left confused. Cinderella's father came out and asked what was going on. "What's going on here?" he said. The prince replied, "There's a girl in the pigeon house, and I must know who she is immediately." The father grabbed his axe and chopped the pigeon house in two. The pigeon house split open, but there was no one inside. When her father returned to the house that night, he found Cinderella sleeping on the floor by the cinders in her rags. The next night, again, the stepsisters ordered Cinderella to help them get ready for the ball, and all she could do was listen quietly to them mutter and moan about that awful girl who got to dance with the prince all night. "She's not as pretty as us," said one of them. She again combed their hair, laced their dresses, shined their shoes, and brought them their shawls, and off they went to the ball. As Cinderella went out to the hazel tree, to her mother's grave, again she found an even lovelier dress than before. Again, when she arrived at the ball, she danced with the prince all night, and the stepsisters and the stepmother didn't even realise, because they were so blinded by their own jealousy. That night, again Cinderella disappeared, leaving the prince feeling even more confused than the night before. On the night of the third dance, the prince came up with a sneaky plan. He decided to paint the palace steps with sticky tar. That night, when Cinderella was at the ball, as before, they danced all night, but when the clock struck midnight, she ran off in a hurry. She left her slipper on the stair, but she was in such a rush she couldn't go back for it. The next morning, the prince arrived at Cinderella's house and declared, "Whoever foot fits this slipper will be my bride." The first sister eagerly grabbed the shoe and tried it on. Her mother went with her into the next room and said, "Just a minute." She anxiously tried on the shoe, but her foot was just too big. Her mother said, "Chop off your toe. You will not need it at all when you are queen." The stepsister took a knife and reluctantly chopped off her toe. She squeezed her foot back into the slipper and returned to the prince. The prince could not deny that the slipper fit and that this must be his true bride. So she jumped on the back of his horse and they galloped off back to the palace to be married. But on the way back, as they passed Cinderella's mother's grave, a white bird circled above their heads and sang, "Turn and look, see the blood, see what's true. Turn and look, your true bride waits for you." Suddenly the prince looked down and saw the drips of blood falling to the ground, and he realised he had been tricked. "You're a false bride," he said, and returned to the house. This time, the second sister eagerly took the slipper. Her mother said, "Just 1 minute," and took her into the next room, where she tried on the shoe. But again, her foot was too wide, too deformed to fit into the shoe. Her mother said, "Cut off your heel. You will not need it at all when you are queen." So the second sister took a sharp knife and sliced off her heel. She squeezed her bleeding foot back into the slipper and returned to the prince, who again could not deny that the shoe did indeed fit and that she must be his true bride. The pair galloped off back to the palace, but as they passed Cinderella's mother's grave, that same bird circled their head once again and sang, turn and look, see the blood, see what's true, turn and look, your true bride waits for you." Again, the prince looked down at the shoe and saw the streams of blood dripping from her foot and realised he had been tricked once again. "You're a false bride," he said, and returned to the house. When he arrived, he said, "Is there no one else in this house? No other girl whose foot could fit this slipper?" Cinderella's father said, "Ah, yes, there is my youngest. She works in the kitchen." "Bring her to me," commanded the prince. "Oh, no," said the stepmother. "You don't want her. She's far too dirty." "Bring her to me at once," he commanded. So Cinderella's father fetched her, and when she arrived, she tried on the slipper, and it fit perfectly. The prince immediately recognised her and knew that she was his true bride. The two galloped off to the palace to be married, and the bird sang, turn and look, see no blood, see what's true. Turn and look, your true bride is now with you." Cinderella and the prince were married at the palace the next day, full of love and joy in their hearts. This story became their joy. He became king and she became queen. As for the stepsisters and the stepmother, they attended the wedding, but all they could do was mutter and scowl. And on the way home, a bird flew down and pecked out their eyes, so they could never see Cinderella with her prince ever again.